in our room before we get going. As I mentioned, this is a second session in a series of Native Food is Medicine, providing emotional resilient support for our American Indian and Alaska Native youth through the healing power of food. And we have a few more sessions after today on Thursday afternoon, so we'd like you to join us or put this on your calendars in advance so you can be prepared to join us. But as we begin our session, it's really important to think of the ways that we serve our young people, and looking at what we put into our bodies is an important factor because we all eat daily. So we want to use this concept of the native healing powers of the food that we ingest. And so we thank you on behalf of the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. We are one of 2 national centers, but with a very specific focus audience. We serve American Indian Alaska Native children and their families in the K-12 School Mental Health Supplemental Project. In addition to that, we're partnering with our Prevention Technology Transfer Center. So if you happen to serve in the prevention area with substance use disorders, we welcome you also, as this is a partnership for this. We are funded by SAMHSA, so it's really important to know that they do ask some specifics of us, which I'll get into in a few moments. But the content of this event is the creation, and the opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect their views or policies, nor that of HHS or the American Indian Alaska Native MHTTC. We're done with action. It's going to be really important that you note 2 things. First and foremost, be patient with us as we gather our slide deck, all the information, the recording. Once it's condensed and prepared, it'll be sent to you via email. In addition to that, you'll be given the link to our GIPRA survey. It's an evaluation survey that will allow you to share your thoughts about today's session, what you learned from our expert, and to let our funders know the high quality information that you're receiving so that continue programming like this. It's really important to us that you help us with that survey. It is anonymous, so none of the answers can be traced back to you. So please keep that in mind, and we want to make sure that you allow yourselves time to take care of that. After today's event, in the chat box, I'll put up the survey link, like I have it here on the screen for all of you to read. You can either click on that or you can do the QR code, but you'll be given a chance to take that survey after today's session. And we really appreciate your feedback. I'm going to also ask that you, for housekeeping, please make sure that you mute your microphones unless you're sharing in the breakout rooms or you're sharing in the session. When you have a question, please raise your hand and things of that nature. Be mindful that, we all have our own opinions, and it's great when we can have an exchange of ideas, and I welcome that opportunity for everybody to be a part of the discussion today with Dr. Quezada. At this time, although we're gathered virtually, it's really important for us to take time to acknowledge the land and pay respect to the Indigenous nations whose homelands were forcibly taken over and inhabited. So I'd like to offer you a few moments just to read through our land acknowledgement that was written by 3 of my colleagues, Ella Driscoll, Keely Driscoll, and Sean Bear, all of whom come from the Meskwaki Nation. Again, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. If you are intending to be on the session for Native Food is Medicine, then you're in the right place. This program isn't done by myself. It takes a team to put projects like this together. And on the screen for you right now, I have our co-director, Teresa Brewington, and our graduate research assistant, Bethany Walzak. And there are several others behind the scenes who help make sure things look nice when we put them on the screen. We have our communications folks and IT folks and people like that who do a great job. Teresa Brewington is actually the co-director for the Trauma Stress Initiative for Children, as well as the K-12 School Supplement Program. She currently serves in that capacity with our center, and she is also she's also Kari and Lumbee, but resides on the Meskwaki settlement with her family. I'm Dr. Allison Bays. I'm from South Texas with the Tapilam Powhatan Nation. And for over 25 years, I've had an opportunity to serve Native communities. And so I'm really grateful to be here with you all today, listening and learning from Dr. Quezada as we get ready to hear more from our presenter. You know, the session's going to be sharing about cultural connections to food, applying a balanced way of eating, and incorporating Indigenous traditions into our lives with the healing power of food. We welcome Dr. Quezada. As you listen to her, you'll have the opportunity to become knowledgeable in providing emotional resilient support for our youth and our school communities. We'll develop healthier eating habits for successful outcomes in and out of the classroom. I'm going to turn the floor over to her now so she can introduce herself and begin our session and our time together. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Bays. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me see, just want to take some time to share my screen here. Let's see. You see that now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. Wonderful. Okay. Good afternoon, greetings, bonjour, buenas tardes, in all of your beautiful languages. My name is Vanessa Quezada, and I'm here to present, as Dr. Bays said, Native Food is Medicine, providing emotional resilient support for American Indian and Native American youth through the healing power of food. I start off with a land acknowledgement. I know that was already done, but my home territory here is Yanawana, the Cuauhteco Estocna of the Estocna people. And these pictures were taken this morning. And this was a part of a ceremony, a prayer that we did. And this was after everything happened. And so here on the left, you'll see the Alamo. And it has now been, we have a mission history, much like many of you. And we're in a place that is now called Texas, and which originally comes from Comanche language, I believe, or Caddo, I believe, that means the friendly place. And these missions were established and our people were enslaved here. And I'm myself from Kickapoo, and I pray with the Powhatan nations, Tapilam. And we've been in litigation about the Alamo, which is a mission site where, a sacred site, right? Where our ancestors are buried, and several different ancestors are buried from different tribes and peoples. And so now that it's gotten World Heritage designation site, there's a lot of money that's being thrown at it. And it's the same song and dance that we see on a lot of our lands. And so this elder in the center picture who's talking to the police officer is Tema Linda. She's one of the clan family leaders. And 3 years ago, when we did an ancestral run to all of the missions, she got that message that we needed to go and pray at the sacred site every single day. And here we are. We had no idea how long it would last. 3 years later, the litigation basically for Tapilam people to have a seat at the table and to stop the desecration of the sacred site because they were planning to expand and build more. And so our request was to just have a seat at the table, right, about the decisions that are being made on our land. And so today marks the day where a settlement is being filed and that agreement is being made. behind closed doors, and we were able to, all of the people that have come every morning to support this prayer, we all gathered and we said a thank you prayer together. And it was beautiful to share that. And I share that with you all as this place of hope that I'm coming from right now, that I'm feeling, because I think we need that. We need more of that. And we also are situated and live about 34 miles from where the shooting happened in Uvalde very recently, in a school that is affecting a lot of just everyone that has this relationship to schooling, state schooling, specifically public schools, and school systems in general, tribal schools. And to see, and so on the right is a picture of Ramon Vasquez, who is the coordinator for AIT, the American Indians of Texas, of the Spanish colonial missions, and is the nonprofit arm. The other part of this prayer that happens when you are taking care of things in a lawsuit. And he was also sharing with us that just across the street from this sacred site, there's still this flag that says, "Come and take it," and it has an AK, our AK-15 on it. And so for us to also be vigilant, and for us to know that there is an invisible force that's working, and that we have to really be focused in our prayers for ourselves, for our families, and so that can ripple out into our communities, into our tribes. And so I just wanted to celebrate this with you all, that this happened for us, for our people here. And as those prayers ripple out for each and every one of you and all of your struggles, and I want to give thanks and give honor to your path, to all of you as educators or prevention specialists, folks that are really helping support the future generations, whether they're coming off substances or they're learning in schools. Everything that you're taking on right now it's so much, and it's so much heavier, and there's a lot more emotion, and you're expected to do so much with so little. And so I want to just hold you all in my heart, and really share that everything that I'm going to share, this presentation, is really for you to activate, to strengthen, to connect to your lands, and to be able to share and care for all of the people that you already do and do it well. So I already introduced myself. I'm Kickapoo and Chichimeca. That is my family. And on the right is one of the sacred runs that we have with our spiritual elder and our runner, David Sandoval, up in front. And now we're ready to begin. For today, our overview, so this is building upon the last gathering that we had 2 weeks ago, where we are looking at, I'm going to review a little bit of that material. So I'm going to go through the first part of these slides rather quickly. I want to review some of those things so that we're all on the same page for today, and just really looking at finding balance for our nervous systems and starting to understand a little bit more the mind-gut connection. We will review a little bit about sugar dependency. What are some of the traditional sugars in our territories versus the process, and how does that play out on our lands? We'll look at finding sugar stabilization and what that means. So finding a stabilization within our sugar balances and our sugar levels through PFC, a protein, fat, carbohydrate combination, and how to create meal plans from that. We will actually look and talk about, we'll have 3 breakout groups today, and we'll make sure that we are taking that time that we need to plan out and to just review, what have we eaten in the last couple of days, and what is one way that we can improve that and align with our traditional values. And then our last section at the bottom, it talks about our examples of food maps and sharing resources. So I'll give examples about different recipes, recipe books that exist. I'm sure you all know of some as well. And then examples of food maps and those activities that we can do in our classroom and with the youth. So we first talked about why is Native food important? It's part of our culture, our kinship, our memory, survival, and it's part of our healing. It helps us to restore the kinship with the land and to be in right relations. It also helps us to find balance in our physiology, because our physiology, one of the most amazing things that I've heard was from Roxanne Swenso of the Pueblo people was that it takes us 20 generations for our DNA to adapt to a location. 20 generations. That just like this blew my mind of really a really strong case of why we should be eating our traditional foods, because this is how we have developed in our nervous system, our DNA over the last 20 generations was for this food specifically, and how that's only changed in the last couple of generations with processed food and things like that. Native foods are a powerful way for us to heal ourselves and for us to heal in community. They're tightly connected to our ceremony, gatherings, and spiritual healings. And some of the challenges that we face with our children and youth today are mainly stress, and you'll see those listed there. The mental illnesses, that the labels that we're putting on our youth, and then in the classroom, what are we experiencing? What are we seeing is an externalized stress or an internalized stress. So either acting out or shutting down. And these are how this starts to play out for us. And so we talked last time a little bit about the stress gut and that connection, that mind-gut connection, and how serotonin, especially in the medical world, is really where a lot of our treatments come from. So the serotonin, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, are what we give to the youth with a lot of those, the depression, the anxiety, any of those labels. That's usually the go-to for the youth for treatment on the medical side of things. But serotonin also mediates our mood, but also has some roles within digestion and pain. And so that the most important thing is that 90% of our serotonin receptors are actually in the gut, and it's a huge place for us if we don't want the youth really having to take these drugs. Like, what are the things that we can do to clear and make sure that they're getting the food and the nutrition that they need? And we talked a little bit about melatonin and that connection of sleep and influences from blue light. So again, this is very quickly because you will be receiving all of these slides, and this whole presentation from last time is recorded, and you can always go back to it if you have questions. So I'll start to slow down on this one. This is where we're going to continue our conversation. So what's sugar got to do with it? So one of the things that we talked about last time was that sugar is actually, and specifically processed sugar, is what will connect to our mu opiate receptors. So those are opiate receptors that are in our brain. And this includes all the different kinds of sugars, the high fructose corn syrup, the sucrose, the dextrose, the fructose, all of these other, it's amazing if you start to Google sugar, all the different names that will come up. But there are studies that there is evidence for sugar addiction, behavioral and neurochemical effects of intermittent excessive sugar intake. There's also other studies that I came upon that talk about how when folks are detoxing, when folks are coming off of heavy substances, opiate substances, whether it's prescription drugs or substances from the streets, that affects those opiate receptors, that when they're coming off of them, that there is an increased craving for sugar, because those are the same opiate receptors that are getting stimulated from these substances. So there is even one article that went as far as to talk about how sugar can be a gateway drug into drugs and alcohol intake, because alcohol also has a crossover with sugar, and the alcohol has a higher sugar intake, some of them, and so they affect the same receptors. And I think this is super important for us to start to understand when we make that choice to not have the processed sugar. So if we're not having the processed sugar, what sugars can we have, right? So this is a small presentation of sugar from the Americas, and really it shows us what the different sugars contain. The maple syrup has all of these amazing vitamins and minerals, and also, that connection to our ceremonies of the awakening of the mother. The mesquite, which grows in our region, in our territory, and down here in the Southwest, has a percentage of protein, and it has some sucrose in addition to carbohydrates, calcium, iron, and minerals. And then honey also has these vitamins that are listed here. And then you'll see the sugar cane. So originally processed sugar comes from sugar cane. And the most important thing to highlight here is that sugar cane is only 10 to 15% sugar. It's mainly water and fiber and some enzymes, vitamins, and minerals. While if you look at that note right above that, it shows us that processed sugar is 99.5% sugar and 0.5% water. So this puts it into perspective of this sugar spike that happens. All of these will spike our sugars because maple syrup, mesquite, honey, and sugarcane all have sugar within them, but they will affect our sugars in different levels because of the amount of sugar, quote unquote sugar, right, that each one contains. Because processed sugar is almost solely sugar, you're going to spike so much more within your body, and your body's going to have to recover from that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Whereas if you're consuming a traditional sugar that comes from the earth, it's got a package of vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and other things, fiber, water, things that we need to complement in our body to help offset some of that spike. So I think one of the things that's important to understand is that these sugar spikes will happen, but they also happen due to other things other than our food. So here you see that, the food does affect it has our sugar spike, right? So it's processed sugar, carbohydrates, but at the same time, there are all of these other elements, including physical activity, that can affect our sugars. So if we walk, that will bring our sugars down. For example, if we're not walking, then our sugars, it takes a while longer for those sugars to be processed in our body. Illness and infections, when our body is in an inflammatory state through illness or due to infections, in both of those states, when there's inflammation, our sugar is spiking. It's higher. I wouldn't say it's spiking, but I would say it's higher than usual. It'll bring your sugars a little bit higher because your body is in more of a stressful state. Sleep also affects our blood sugars. If we're not getting good sleep, it's this horrible cycle of we're not resting and our body is not able to process what's happening in our body. And this goes for sugar, but it also goes for our emotions. It goes for our mental health, so many different things, right? So because like we said, the melatonin is made in the gut as well. So we need it. That sleep is super important for us to have this balance. And the key thing that happens here is that the cortisol in your body will rise, which will cause when you're in a higher stress state. So this also goes with the last one that talks about stress, right? So if you're not sleeping, you're in a higher stress state, your cortisol goes up. And what happens is that immediately over time, if you have cortisol over long periods of time, it really depletes you. And it affects your blood sugars actually come up because your body thinks, since you're not sleeping enough, you need more energy. And so it's harder to manage your blood sugars at this point. Oh, and I wanted to reference the Instagram at the bottom. Let me see if I can go back. Yes, the Instagram at the bottom. So I know that a lot of us are getting a lot of different information from different places, but this was presented pictorially differently by Indigenous nutritionist. So she goes by Indigenous nutritionist on Instagram. Her name is Sharon Swampy. I believe she's Cree and Mexican, I believe, or Mexica, I'm not sure. And so she presents a lot of this different information. She offers ways that you can eat healthy plates, healthy balanced foods, recipes, all kinds of wonderful information. So I wanted to uplift her for that. And as we talk about finding balance, this talks a little bit more, and we touched on this the first class, was stress, how stress and us being in survival mode and all of the intergenerational trauma that we're experiencing, the things that we're seeing on social media, has us in a stressful state internally, and how that affects us again with the cortisol and then causes us to be in a higher inflammatory state. Sleep, according to the research, we need at least 7.5 hours of sleep every night. The chances of us needing less than that is equivalent to the chances of us getting struck by lightning. And so that was, and so there are some references down there for you. And that the struck by lightning came from a book that's called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. And we talked a little bit about physical activity and the walking, and how even walking can be anti-inflammatory. Walking 20 minutes per day really allows us, it's like taking an ibuprofen. It allows the inflammation in our body to come down and to circulate. And even just walking 15 minutes a day, if that's, your first step, that in and of itself reduces mortality by 14%. And it expanded people's life expectancy by 3 years in these studies. So it's so important to really think about, when are the times that we can take these breaks and take care of ourselves and take these walks and allow us to decompress and connect. So why am I talking about sugar so much? Besides the fact that all of the diabetes, it affects our mental health. And this is what we're going to be looking at. So I really like this image of the blood sugar roller coaster. This is a really good diagram, and just pictorially, I think for me, it's nice to look at it because you can see in these green lines. I'm not sure if you can see my pointer as I put it out there, but these green lines are the ideal balanced blood sugar. And then you see these spikes. So what happens is that we wake up in the morning within a healthy digestion. We would be eating within the first hour of waking up something with protein. And then as that starts to wear off, we start to crash. So we start to get a little bit less clear, maybe a little foggy, maybe a little tired. Your blood sugars, all of these things physiologically start to happen when your blood sugars start to fall. So that cues us, oh, I need to eat. So then if we're eating high sugar, anything that comes from the grocery store that comes in a package, we're having these foods and this, because again, sugar is in high fructose corn syrup, which is in a majority of what you'll find at a lot of grocery stores. And so then if we have these sugars that are 99.5% sugar, right? And we're getting, this is what I mean when it spikes. So we spike into, you feel good, like immediately that sugar is going to go to your opiate receptors. It's going to make you feel good. It's going to make you feel like you have a lot of energy, and all of a sudden you're ready to go about your day. So, but then the insulin has to work a little bit harder to bring you back. And then you start to crash again. And so we eat, and then you just see this roller coaster happening over and over. And so when we are going between extremes and we're eating something a little bit later than we probably should, and we're crashing, and we can sometimes overdo it, and we get into this high-low. Number one, like one of the things that's interesting to look at and that this allows us to see is that if we stay within the green lines, it's a smoother line, right? So if you were to see that stretched across, it would be a lot longer than the line that goes so high and so low in the extremes. And that's pretty much the purpose of this, is that when we're keeping ourselves fed within a certain amount of time, that we won't go into these highs and these lows. and that we're going to talk about what are the things that we can eat in combination so that we're not going into these highs, and why and how that will work for us. So this is going to be our first breakout session. I want you all to get a chance to talk to each other, and this is our reflection. So we are going to reflect in your group on the last 2 days. How many meals did you eat? And what would you have to do to eat every 3 or 4 hours? So that comes from a recommendation of, to be able to stay out of those extremes, that we will put ourselves on a timer or figure out a way that we can eat every 3 to 4 hours so that we're not crashing and that we're not spiking, and that in and of itself really makes the difference. On the left, there's a picture that says, I can't do this, I don't have any talent, but I may be able to do this. So it's the difference of the way that we're thinking, and when we put it into the context of our youth, think about, how do you feel when you haven't eaten? Most of us get hangry, right? So then what about all of the youth? If they don't have a snack at school, they didn't like what the lunchroom served or what they were served for lunch, that they just skip the entire meal and they don't have another meal until they get home. So how would the classroom setting change if you and the students were able to eat every 3 to 4 hours? So in your groups, you're going to imagine into what is possible. What is possible? So 1, how many meals did I eat in the last 2 days? 2, what would I have to do to eat every 3 to 4 hours? Is that setting a timer? Is that taking snacks? What does that look like for you? And 3, how would the classroom setting change if you and the students ate every 3 to 4 hours? Okay, so I'm gonna stop the share for now. And Dr. Bays, if you can support us in getting into those breakout groups.
Yes, and as you will be assigned automatically into your breakout room, please note that you'll get a timer. I'll do a disclaimer announcement, if you will. You'll have 1 minute remaining when that disclaimer comes on to return back to the group together. Thank you all. We're hopeful that you had some time to share with one another. As we give everybody a few more moments to join us again, we'll turn the floor back over to Dr. Quezada.
Wonderful. We want to hear from you all. It's good to see some of your faces. If you'd like to share something from what's on your heart? What insights did you get through speaking to your colleagues? Feel free to type in the chat or share.
I would like to say, somebody brought up a good point in our group about eating late. If we get home late, it's late in the day for us to eat. So we skip that dinner meal.
I'll share as well. In our group, we talked about how some of our native foods were not accessible, and then how some of the foods were also too expensive for some of our budgets, and then also eating late and people working so far from home that when they get home, they're tired and it's late and they just eat, they want to relax. They don't go for a walk. And during the day, we're so busy that we don't take that time to take our walks and do things that are healthier for us.
Okay, I can also, add something else to what Doris said. We also were, talking about having breakfast, as you were telling us that, in the morning is very important to have good food, some proteins, and, some fuel for our day. And we do, at least in my case, I'm doing the opposite. I have to have something sweet in the morning when I can have, a good portion of fruit combined with cheese, and bread, some protein in there. So that was discussed that we're doing the opposite. We are eating at night what it's supposed we have to eat for breakfast. And also, we were discussing like there's high statistics in diabetes here because it's just the way that the food is, is made in the United States. Everything is highly engineering, and there's a lot of preservatives, salts, and sugar in those packages that we buy from Costco, and we just, heat it up in the microwave. And basically, we were discussing about that.
Thank you for all of your shares. It's really complex, and if folks still have things to share in the chat, I'm open to it. Thank you so much. I sounded like eating late. I saw a lot of nods when eating late came up, and folks are exhausted, right? They're exhausted. You're working all day. So I guess one of the questions that I want to pose is like, do you feel like you are as exhausted? Do you feel like if you ate like a snack, that could shift some of that? I mean, obviously everybody's being overworked, right? But are there, like, that's the number one problem. But I guess maybe even experiment, right? And see if adding some snacks throughout your day would help to feel good enough, like Dory said, to want to take that walk when you get home. What is it that is going to help you get through your day a little bit smoother, right? And experiment with this on your own time, having some of these snacks, because if we're not crashing and we don't feel that immediate need to just grab whatever's around us, if we can have something available to save us from that, then we can be more choiceful, right? And I also heard access. Everything's really expensive, and a lot of our traditional foods are not even available to us. And so sometimes they're being sold back to us. And so I definitely want to address some of those things. There was also some about preservatives and packaging, and that goes into other toxic things that are not necessarily sugar, but that are GMO products, which I heard GMO foods, as well as some of the food color dye, and how the youth can be actually more sensitive to these things. And some of those things in studies have been linked to certain ADHD and different quote unquote medical disorders, right? And so that's something that I want to discuss next time as well, because that opens a whole field of studies and science. So we will definitely be getting into some of that. There were some great questions in the chat about sometimes sugars are marketed as more natural, or what is a natural sugar and what's a fake sugar? What are the sugars that are harming us more or less? And it's a complicated answer. To be honest, like, you can look up in Google and it'll tell you all the different names for sugar, the fructose, the sucralose, there's hundreds of names for sugar, the way that they disguise things. And so you really have to be careful. But the overall, if it's a processed sugar, that it is going to be, so if either it's refined or unrefined, if it's a sugar is a sugar is a sugar, in a sense that the sugar is going to spike your blood if you're not eating it with something else. If you're eating a processed sugar, it may have many different names in it. More than likely, if it's coming in a package, then you're getting a processed sugar. Even if they're saying it's natural, cane sugar in its pure form is cane, right? And so at some fancy grocery stores, you can get it that way. But that's really the only quote unquote natural. So thank you for bringing that up. I definitely would say be careful about that, and use your cell phone to start to see all the different names of sugar. And if it would be helpful for me to do a slide and just put all of that out there, I'll be happy to do that as well. And I'm just looking at a few of these comments talking about standing desks, that they improve overall health, walking, that's something that we can do in the workplace, intermittent fasting, sitting is the new smoking. So I'm going to respond to that very quickly. In the medical world, there is a lot of buzz around sitting as the new smoking. It's more of a buzz than there is the actual research behind it. Sitting in a new smoke as a new smoking is more contextual, and that smoking is highly damaging to the lungs and causes COPD and cancers and all these different things. Sitting is not necessarily equivalent to smoking. There's not like a one-to-one connection there, right? But when you contextualize it into what is our biggest healthcare challenge to staying healthy, then it's not smoking anymore. Nowadays, what we're facing is lack of movement, lack of physical exercise. So I just wanted to distinguish that because it's a buzzword that lots of folks like to use, but it needs to be contextualized into how they're referencing that. Intermittent fasting is also a good question. And that one, it's recommended in some population. There's different studies, there's a lot of different studies, but at the end of the day, what happens is you're not getting what we're talking about, this regular, like smaller, you're getting a even higher extreme, right? Where you're eating so much and you're eating extra during the short hours of the day, and then you're crashing. And what happens when you crash is that your liver goes through gluconeogenesis. And what happens is that it starts releasing glucose and like pulling glucose from your cells that you need. And it also changes your hormones. And so, our people, lots of our different cultures, we do fasting, right? But it's in 4-day increments. It's in shorter increments. It's not an everyday thing that's happening, and it really affects your physiology. So there's a few studies that will encourage it for like postmenopausal women and small populations, but overall in the long term, it affects, again, those cortisol levels that we were talking about, and it causes inflammation in the body. So I definitely say be careful. Okay, so I'm really happy for all this engagement in the chat. It's okay with you all. We're going to continue on. Thank you for all your comments and for your shares. Okay, so what is the impact of macronutrients on the blood glucose levels? So I really like this chart because it starts to show you what happens when you consume something. So when you eat a carbohydrate, you see that spike that happens. So this is your blood sugar that we're talking about that spikes, and it goes really high, and it takes your body less time to digest it. So you can see that the time it takes to digest along the bottom. So the time that it takes after you eat it, it's a little bit quicker to digest. So the carbs don't last that long. So if we're reaching for that bag of chips, all of a sudden we feel okay, but then it goes through our system and we're hungry again, right? So we don't feel full, we don't feel satiated. It's high impact for our blood sugars, and about 90 to 100% of it is going to turn into glucose. So it's a fast spike, and it'll take us about 15 minutes to 2 hours to actually digest it. When we eat a protein, what happens? There's more of a moderate impact on our blood sugar response. So it's a moderate impact in the sense that around 50% of it, some of it, our body does turn into glucose, into sugar in the body. It does peak within 2 to 4 hours. So it's double the time that it takes us to process carbohydrates. And a key here is that for renal patients, so in the medical world, renal patients that are on specific kidney diets, that either the number one cause for renal failure is diabetes. So when our diabetes goes out of control and it starts to, our sugar levels are high in our body consistently, it starts to just like beat on our kidneys and those filters that we have. And so at some point, those filters start to give out. And that's when you start to go into renal failure, and you can get kidney failure, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. And then stage 4 and 5 is when you start to be on dialysis. And so the number one thing that they tell the folks that are in kidney failure below stage 3 is to combine. Whenever you're having a carbohydrate or a sugar, you're going to combine it with a protein. And why is that? Because that protein is going to help to soothe out. Instead of spiking so much as the carb does, it's going to help to absorb that spike and make it longer. So instead of that being so high, it's going to come down into like where that protein is. It's going to help to smooth that over so it's not such an extreme for your body. And now fat. So what happens when we consume a fat? And it's important, not every fat is the same, much like sugar. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But the fat in it itself is a low impact. It doesn't have, obviously it's not going to affect your glucose quite as much, and it takes much longer to absorb. So only about 10% of that really affects your blood sugar response, and it buys your body more time to absorb the sugar that you're consuming, or what your body, you know, even if it's carbs or protein, it turns it into sugar, but it's slower to peak because it has that fat that's kind of extending that curve out a little bit. So I wanted to share that just so that you can see pictorially what that looks like and why there's this recommendation. So this is the name of the game: protein, fat, and carbohydrates. So my mother-in-law, she has been a trainer and she's worked with so many people, and she's like, protein, fat, and carbohydrate, that's where it's at, right? There are a lot of studies behind why. So again, I wanted to clarify that it's a good fat. It's not just any fat. It has to be a good fat, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But when you combine at every meal, you know, every meal that you're having, whether it's meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, snack, when you make it a protein, fat, carbohydrate combination, it helps to soothe that line so that your blood sugar is not spiking into one of those extremes, and that your body has more time to digest all of it. Not only that, but it also helps you to feel full. It helps you to feel full so that you're digesting for a longer amount of time, and it carries you into your next meal when it's time for you to eat, right? So we're going to do breakout groups one for our second time. And this is my godson, Anua, and he's 7th generation Paulisteco, Tapilam. So his ancestors are buried at the Alamo, where that first slide, the opening slide that I shared. So in these breakout groups, you're going to build on what you are just already talking about. But specifically, the first group, you were thinking, okay, what times of the days do I eat? Where am I missing my meals? This next group, you're going to actually list out what did you eat in the last 2 days. And I put yes, everything. And also take note of what you like. What are your go-to snacks and foods? Like, what do you like to eat? What brings you joy? And I want to also acknowledge that there may be some emotions that come up from this, some emotions that come up in response to what we're eating, and that's very normal. And for us to non-judgmentally just write out, this is what I ate in the last 2 days, and just be able to look at that for ourselves. So Dr. Bays, are you able to connect us into those next breakout groups?
Yes, all the rooms are open now. People have been assigned. If you were unassigned, I'll make sure that I put you into one. I think Jasmine's the only one I need to assign. You should have about 3 to 4 people in your group.
Come back. As folks come back, we want to open the floor again, encourage folks more specifically, like what came up for you when you were listing what you ate. And feel free to share in the chat, and we'll take about 3 or 4 shares.
The lack of meal planning for me, and how I prepare for everybody else, but not me.
Okay, me, Virginia, for me, I realized that during the last 2 days, I've been eating a lot of carbs. Can you hear me, guys? And also, one of my team workers, with I was sharing the break room. I think he's eating pretty healthy. I see that his diet is very well balanced, and I'm very, proud of him. He got oatmeal, fish soup, Mediterranean food, then egg and toast, and then chicken fajitas with rice. So there's a balance there, in his meals.
Thank you, Virginia. Anyone else?
I think one big thing that came up in our group, we all like carbs. We realize that. But then also somebody brought up that they live in a rural area. And I remember that from my youth, and that we used to have to drive 40 something miles to town to shop. And so, like they were saying, things don't keep if you make one trip, every week or every couple weeks. So buying the stuff that keeps, that's the stuff that has I can't even think of the word.
Preservative.
Yeah, preservatives in it. And then the places that are close to us, like the little town stores and whatever, they don't have as healthy stuff, and it's like super expensive. So it's like $7 for milk and $7 for white bread, when and it's ridiculous. So that's another challenge for us as Native people too, that live in rural areas.
I have a question. Well, we're in an urban setting, so pretty much everything's available to us, including all the junk foods. But I have a question. Sometimes you hear about the carbs, they're bad, and then say wheat bread is better than white bread. But my question is, because we eat tortillas in our home, and is there a difference in, and I guess they're all carbs, between flour and corn tortillas? Is there one that's healthier? Flour, corn tortillas? Which is healthier of the carbs then?
Thank you, Ruben. I'll give one more person a chance to share, and then I'll.
So my son is trying a gluten-free diet, and they recommend a corn.
Oh, okay. Okay. Good.
And depending on where you live, I noticed at the grocery store here in South Texas, there are tortillas made of nopal,
Right.
which I
I've
think is
had
very
those.
interesting. I haven't tasted them yet, but they must be a healthier option.
Yeah. There's a place here that has it, and the guy that runs the restaurant is actually a cancer treatment guy, radiation. And he's kind of trying to move in the direction of promoting healthier food, to somehow reduce cancer rates, And they have those cactus tortillas there. And for us, we've always heard that cactus is good for diabetes and, other things. And unfortunately, the Spanish stations, television stations, were promoting what they call super nopal, super cactus, and then they would you know, they would charge, I don't know, $40, $50 for a bottle. And I thought, well, that's just dry cactus, you know. My mother was trying to buy it, and as she got older, we kind of had to keep an eye on her not to order that stuff from some doctor. She would refer to the doctor on the ad. And I told her, Mom, we have cactus in bag, because she would have cactus in bag growing and make different dishes with cactus. And I told her we could just dry those up, grind them up, and you know, you'd probably have a super nopal for $3 instead of the $40 or $60 they were charging for the bottle. You know?
Yeah, thank you. They're trying to sell all kinds of stuff these days, right? And especially if it's novelty, something
Yeah.
different. So I think it can be really confusing, and I'm gonna touch on it here. I'm gonna go into these next set of slides about protein, carbohydrates, and fats. So you can kind of start to see, okay, what is traditional, what's not, what are the benefits, and why would I eat this? But I want to also lift up, Dory, what you said about we all like carbs, right? They help us feel better, and that's that crossover between the opiate, like we are actually getting pain relief and feeling good from the carbohydrates, from the sugar, right? So these are the things of why it feels good for us. And the access again is coming up, and it's something that we're going to discuss in one of the next part of the series is the access for real folks, that and for really like why bread is so common, right? Because it keeps for so long, and we're going to go for those carbs because they're going to last us longer. So thank you all for sharing that and sharing all of your voices in this space. This next part about protein is, so we are focusing here on traditional foods. So what do we mean by traditional foods? Traditional meats, fish, birds, insects, eggs, wild game. The wild game in general is a lot leaner. In some of our territories, we have caribou, moose, elk, bison, deer, bear, you know, all kinds of different meats. And then we have organ meats that are high in nutrients and specifically great for postpartum foods, anybody that's recovering from blood disorders, illness. Specifically, I have a friend who had an autoimmune disease that cured herself, really eating organ meats. But again, you either have to have access to it through your tribe, through food sovereignty networks, or be able to pay the big bucks to access them. Now they encapsulize them in all kinds of things. The bone soup, bone broth, the caldo de hueso, these soups that our families have made for generations. That was one of the original ways of cooking, is that we would cook things underground. We would heat up the stones and then put that into, I can only speak for our territory because that's the only thing I know, but into the deer, we would have the deer skins, and then we'd heat up the stones and then put them in there to cook the soup with the water. So the water helped to absorb some of the heat so that the stone wouldn't burn through the skin. But the bone soup, the bone broth, the bone is a high source of calcium. So a lot of the lactose that they try to feed us and the European foods, you know, that the lactose is not good for us because we have not our systems have not digested that for over 20 generations. And so in addition to that, it's highly, highly processed. So you'll notice that lactose is not going to be any part of this. No milk is included in any of this because our digestive systems, again, speaking from 20 generations that it takes for your system to adapt, if we're not used to, our digestive systems are not used to seeing it, they're not going to process it well. And what does that cause in our body? It causes inflammation, and it causes that lack of processing. It causes a lot of inflammation. And so the bone broth is something that's affordable for folks, that when you if you're buying, you know, meat or chicken, or you're able to go and ask for bones, some of the times we've been able to find places that will just give us the bones because they're not doing anything with them, the different ranches and things like that. So it's it's something that we really have to get creative with, right? We have to really get creative to figure out how are we going to make these things accessible for ourselves and our families and our people. Salmon, cod, in some parts, some areas, you know, this fish would fall into the traditional foods. The canned fish bones, when you're canning the fish, I know that when we were in Alaska, they canned the strips of salmon for us, and that we ate that is really one of the highest sources of calcium, again, through that canned and that preserving, right? So then when we're thinking about how can things last us longer, how can we put this on our shelf and have it, you know, who are the people that we can trade with to receive this? And then when we're at the grocery store, we look for white meat, low fat, low sodium. And that comes specifically from a book called Recovering Our Ancestors' Gardens. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Down here in the Southwest and into Mexico, a lot of our people would eat insects and grasshoppers and crickets, and they call them chapulines. Really, you want to be careful how much protein you're eating. You really don't need that much during the spring and the summer when your body is, when you're moving, and that to keep warm, you need a little bit extra. So you'll need a little bit more in the fall and winter. So these are some things to kind of keep in mind about seasonal eating, and we'll talk about that as well. Good fat. So in this picture, Pancho is the elder that's in this picture, and our sister Daniela, two-spirit sister, are taking care of this bison head. And so we have been in the process of recovering how to render lard from the different animals. We are super privileged to have a buffalo bison sanctuary that's about an hour and a half from here, that is just outside of what we now know as San Antonio. And it's accessible, and it's being caretaken by an Apache, Lipan Apache woman. And so we have more access through that to be able to start to recover some of these processes. And this is a picture from when we did the we cooked the bison. The elders know how to cook underground, and so they've been teaching us little by little how to do some of this. But when we think of fat, there's this article that came out about guts and grease, and how traditionally, again, for thousands of years, we've been eating fat, and that this whole campaign from the Heart Association that we shouldn't be having any fat, it's thrown us off balance. And although I agree that we should not be eating trans fat and the highly saturated fats that are coming to us through the grocery stores, there are certain fats that we can combine with our meals and our snacks that are good fats that do come from this continent, like sunflower seeds, pecans, pine nuts, acorns, hazelnuts, avocados. And again, these are not just fat, they're also good protein, right? So some of these things, some of these foods are actually a package. And then we have farther south, we now have access to avocados, which are originally from Mexico. Now, when we speak about carbohydrate, and this is where we'll get into your question, Ruben, about when we think of carbohydrates, we're thinking of vegetables, fruits, and grains. So these are our traditional foods, the corns, the beans, the squash that we're growing in our territories. Maybe some of us in our homes, wild roots, the camas and the cattail. These, are things that we've eaten for thousands of years. In this territory, the camas and the cattail were some of our first foods that we've had that have been here on these lands for over 7,000 years. Dandelion greens, wild lettuce, these are available to us. Sometimes we just need to connect with elders to remind us, what does this look like? Or where does this grow? Or, wild rice and wild oats. And again, these have so many different vitamins and minerals, this combination that's nourishing for us. This gluten substitute. So really, Ruben, what you're talking about with the flour or the corn is the main difference is that flour is gluten-based, and that flour doesn't come from this continent. It comes from the European continent. So again, it's more work for our digestion to try to process it. I don't know the exact number, but I know that especially in the Recovering Our Ancestors Gardens, it says, you know, a majority of Native people do not have the enzymes to digest gluten. So that causes us harm, because then that gluten, or that white flour specifically, our body recognizes it as sugar. And that's what causes more diabetes. And that's what causes all these other problems. And so what are some of the things that we can substitute for gluten if we have access to it? Arrowroot, corn, potato starch, rice flour. Potatoes come from South America. You know, this rice flour would be wild rice. There's other flours that are available. I've seen people, and I've known that some of the Tewa people have dried them. And one of my teachers, she's a partera, she's a midwife here, she dries the nopal and she'll put it in the oven and it dries, so the cactus will dry, and then you can make it into a flour. So that's how they're making these tortillas, is they make that into the flour and they mix it a little bit with the corn, right? So that's what they're doing there. We have amaranth that grows amazing in hot environments. It's incredibly sturdy. We're growing some right now. Lentils and quinoa. Quinoa, again, is from South America. It's a traditional grain. It also is high in protein. Potatoes, we just talked about. Potatoes, you have to be careful, because if you are treading that line with having high sugars already, whether you're pre-diabetic or on that spectrum and headed that way, potatoes are recognized in our body as sugar as well. And so they have this high content. And so you have to be careful of that if you're incorporating potatoes, you know, that you are adding this protein and a good fat to it, and you're only eating a little bit at a time, right? We don't want to overdo anything. Wild berries are healthy carbohydrates, and you know, we eat a little bit at a time. Again, this can be expensive at the grocery store, but I think it's really important for us to acknowledge as well, is that we have to be able to acknowledge that you can't just cut and stop sugar cold turkey. That can also be dangerous. One, you're going to feel really bad for all the reasons we've talked about, right? So this literally, it is chemically, when you think about it, it's the sugar affects your brain and your opiate receptors, and you can physically feel like that detox that happens if you just stop having sugar, processed sugar, cold turkey, especially if you're drinking like several sodas a day and then all of a sudden you stop. That can be actually kind of dangerous. Like throwing your body into low sugars is just as dangerous as having high sugars. So in the medical world, that's why you have to be really careful with insulin, you know, because people can actually die from having a low blood sugar. Now, so we have to be intentional. None of this is going to happen overnight. And we have to start to think, okay, if I am drinking 5 sodas, can I drink 4 sodas for this week? And then maybe next week or in a couple of weeks, come down to 3, right? Like we want to make gradual changes so that your body is able to make those changes with you, and that you're not feeling bad when you're making these changes. So we have our next breakout question. So reflecting on all of those traditional foods, these are examples of a traditional meal that we made for our meetings. So we've been starting to have that intention for when we have our community meetings, that we're cooking traditional foods like in a crock pot, you know, something that's accessible for folks. And we're finding creative ways to like reach out to the aunties in the community to see if they can cook for us and be able to support each other, right, with whatever budgets that we have, and ways that we can start to connect and support each other in our gifts. So we have some really amazing aunties that cook in the community. This meal right here is turkey. It's just ground turkey and some sweet potato, and it's cut up. Again, when we're coming down from sugar, being able to replace that with a natural sugar like a sweet potato, and then this turkey helps to hold it so that your body doesn't spike. And you add a little bit of salt. You add a little bit of salt. You add a little bit of lard, like animal fat, manteca in Spanish. This is what helps to create this whole natural meal. And this is a PFC meal, protein, fat, and carbohydrate. And then we made it into chalupas. We We put it on these tortillas, on the corn tortillas, and we added a little bit of cilantro and, you know, a little bit of color with the cabbage there. And that's what we served for our meeting. And then on the right, this was a postpartum meal. We went to go take care of some friends on the Seneca Nation, and we made them a traditional a deer bone. It was a deer stew, right? This one wasn't with bone broth. We made a bone broth with the bison, but you know, we cut up some veggies, we put it in there with the deer, we put it in the crock pot or the Instapot, and it was done in 15 minutes, you know, and it meant the world to them as new parents to have this meal. So for your breakout, these are just some examples, right? And for your breakout, write out 3 meals and 1 snack using this combination of protein, fat, good fat, and carbohydrate that is accessible for you. And remember to include things that you like and at least 1 traditional food from your region per meal if you can. So that's going to be our next breakout. Dr. Bays, if we can. Oh, we only have a few more minutes left. The time all of a sudden
Yes.
slipped.
It's going quickly, but all the rooms are assigned. As we're slowly bringing people back, as people are rejoining us, know that we only have a few more minutes left in our session for today. So we want to be mindful of everybody's time schedule. If you could just bear with us as we close out today's session with Dr. Quezada. Everybody should be joining us back. I see some are still in the chat, in the breakout rooms. Let's see if they're going to come back and join us. They should be closing in 5 seconds.
Okay.
I'd like to welcome everybody back. We know we lost a few folks right here at the end. We're just about out of time, but want to close it in a good way. Dr. Quezada?
Yes, thank you all for sharing. We're not going to have time to share for this one, but I just wanted to leave you all with this Recovering Our Ancestors' Gardens and the Pueblo Food Experience. These are 2 examples of many, many resources that have their beautiful pictorial shares of these food journeys and of these food ways, and have actual recipes and examples from different territories. The Devin Masua's work comes from the 5 tribes in the Great Lakes area, and then we have the Pueblo Food Experience from Roxanne Swansel, and that comes from the Tewa area, so the Southwest. In the future, in the next few presentations, we'll be talking more about these, the food pyramid, how that can relate to our traditional foods, the seasonal eating that I alluded to. Also, like, what are some of the ways that we can start to map our foods in our territory and make them accessible? And then what are some of the food mapping activities that we can do in our home places and our own lands? So this is my contact. I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of this presentation, for taking the step for yourself. We must take a responsibility for our health and for the well-being of our children. In doing so, we pass on a legacy of self-respect and tribal strength for future generations. And with that, I will say thank you. And for the elders and the youth and all the generations that are on this call, there are so many people that need you healthy, strong, and our lands need you healthy, strong, the animals. And we really need to be able to support each other. So as you start to make these changes, reach out to somebody, have an accountability buddy, you know, somebody that's going to be going through it with you. that makes a world of difference. And I hope you all have a great day. Thank you so much for everything y'all shared.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll be around for questions for a few minutes if anybody has any questions or a few things to say.
Please make sure you take time to fill out the survey if you haven't done so already. Thank you all for joining us for today. We look forward to seeing you in July. If anybody has any further questions, Dr. Quezada will stay on the line for a few more minutes. You can unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat. Yes, Rachel, I'm gonna type those up real quick if I can get to a calendar. I'll remember them. July. I believe it's the 14th and the 28th. And then we'll have one in August, Rachel. I believe it's August 11th.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good day.